Welcome to State of the Art Southern Illinois, a podcast by the Marion Cultural and Civic Center. Our guest today is Max Senteney, founder of River to River Community Records. Max and I discuss his musical background, what was behind him creating River to River Community Records, and the albums released so far, as well as a couple of upcoming albums to be expected from his label. Max, thanks for joining us today.
For sure. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, you have started River to River Community Records.
That's right.
And then you also started a kind of creative community online through a Facebook group, River to River Creative Community. Is that what it's called?
That's right. Yep.
And all of this is really intriguing to me as far as a way to cultivate the arts in Southern Illinois. So let's start with a little bit of your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your presence in the music industry.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born and raised here in Southern Illinois. Grew up in DeSoto, I guess. But also kind of grew up in Carbondale. Went to high school in Carbondale and everything else. And have been playing music in Carbondale since I was in high school, so since I was 14 or 15. Been playing in multiple, like mostly punk rock bands, kind of punk and metal stuff, and even some weird noise and experimental stuff. So I was always inspired by the sort of DIY music community that we had in this kind of small corner of the world here in Carbondale and beyond, all through Southern Illinois, really. So, I mean, that's where I cut my teeth, was playing in basements in Carbondale, places like the Lost Cross and the Swamp and the Ski House and all of these kind of staples of the DIY music scene there in Seadale. And also the dive bars around that would host weird or loud music, like punk stuff and experimental stuff. Like PK's or Boobies. We used to have a lot of shows at Boobies when that was there on the Strip. And Hangar and the rest of it, you know. But, so, I mean, that's where I fell in love with music, was doing that sort of underground punk stuff around Southern Illinois. And, you know.
I'm going to say that's a little bit surprising looking at you today.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily strike me as a hardcore punk musician at this point.
Sure. Yeah, it's I guess it's been a bit of a progression to get to that, but I don't know. Ultimately, I mean, since I was young, I've always been a music fan and always just a fan of music in general and its sort of possibilities and sort of what can music do and how many different sort of emotions and feelings can it pull out of a human being, you know? And that's, you know, the noisy punk rock stuff certainly finds a different emotion than, chill banjo music or a lot of the stuff that I play today. But I've always been very interested in exploring that spectrum, you know, because music is an amazing art form in that way, that it's a very visceral art form that can take on just so many different forms. You know?
Well, and I think what you're saying right now is so key to what you're saying about your progression of your music, is the emotion and the angst of punk rock is so appropriate to how so many of us feel as teenagers.
Sure.
And so appropriate for that time.
Yeah.
In your life.
But also I think I leaned towards it back then because it was so accessible and a pretty easy music form to create and to embody. You just got to learn that power chord, and then you can move it anywhere on the neck, and you don't even have to know what notes you're playing, but you just kind of go by feel, you know. And that's the same with, I mean, that's kind of what I love about drums too. But that's why I lean towards punk rock, and you know, the same could be said about the shows that we were booking. You know, I mean, it was people with that sort of DIY ethos that wanted to have shows. They didn't necessarily know how to be a music promoter or how to book a venue. They just wanted to have music in their house, and have a good time. So that punk rock ethos is what I was kind of raised on in my musical career or whatever. And it stuck with me. But I guess I have gravitated to more maybe marketable music forms, or however you want to say it. But that I still love making that punk rock stuff. I still am doing recording projects where I'm recording the noisy experimental stuff because it'll always be a part of me.
That's awesome.
So I came up playing the punk stuff, and I went to school at SIU for a couple years doing audio production because I knew that I wanted to be in the music world professionally as a career in some way. So I went to SIU doing audio production for a couple years before I kind of started to have that anxiety about all of the student loans that I was stacking up, and about, I guess, being stuck with that career path. If I had that degree, well, then is the office going to just be my studio? Is the studio just going to feel like an office job where I have to do these gigs to make the money to pay for my student loans and stuff? I started to have these kind of feelings, which maybe, were warranted, maybe not, maybe a little bit of both. But either way, I dropped out of school and decided to just pursue performing music a little more seriously, which was easier when I wasn't doing classes and wasn't committing all of this money to learning how to produce music, because I was kind of teaching myself how to do that stuff anyway in my little home studio. And not to say that there's no value in getting a degree in that. Of course there is, and there's amazing teachers and professors in the SIU music program, but or the audio production program, that is.
And I'm sure that being part of that program for the time that you were laid a great foundation for what you're doing now.
Well, absolutely it did, yeah. But shortly after that, shortly after I dropped out, I was in a limbo where I was figuring out, like, okay, well, how do I make this work if I want to do music professionally? How do I approach that? Because that's something that we never really focused on in the DIY punk scene. In fact, we maybe rejected it, right? We didn't want to be sellouts or anything, So it was something I didn't know much about, but I got a pretty rare opportunity to work for the Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band, and it was essentially a mutual friend, a friend of mine that was a good friend of the Big Damn Band. The band had reached out to him to see if he would want to be crew for their band, be their guitar tech. And he couldn't do it because he is getting married and having kids and settling down, but he referred him to me as a person who'd been playing music most of my life and on and off stages. I could probably handle it. So I got that gig, being the guitar tech for Rev Peyton's Big Damn Band. This was probably 2000. This was 2013 when I started doing that. And this kind of opened up the world of kind of professional music performing and touring.
So that was your first taste of the real commercial music industry.
Yeah, exactly. And, it opened up my eyes for sure. And it was just a unique way to see the world and gain a lot of perspective about life in general and the world. We've toured all over to Europe and New Zealand and Australia and all over the place. So I did that gig for a few years, being the guitar tech, kind of roadie for the Big Damn Band, until their drummer at the time retired, and then I picked up the drumsticks, and they hired me as the drummer. So I've been drumming for the Big Damn Band since 2016, I guess, now. And it's
approximately how many gigs, how many bookings do you guys, How many dates do you guys do a year with Reverend Peyton and the Big Damn Band?
It's somewhere around, 150 shows probably. We're on the road for over 200 days a year. And it used to be a lot more, but every year is a little bit less, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we stay pretty busy. I mean, we tour
And
pretty constantly.
Let's be clear,
unless
you're not asking for the band to make less money.
No, right. I mean,
You're looking for more quality dates.
yeah, that would be the
still-
idea.
yeah.
The idea, because I mean, touring is work. I mean, at first it seems like a sort of the ideal, sort of glorious situation for a musician to be in. You're touring the world, but it's a lot of work. And so, I mean, ideally, we would be.
And it's a lot of long days that people don't understand, especially for a drummer.
Yeah,
You've got a lot more gear to set up and tune up and get ready than everybody else.
exactly. And it's starting early in the morning with the long drive, and then getting there for sound check, loading in, and yeah, the day's not done until well after midnight. So I mean, they're full days, no doubt. But ideally, you would be getting better gigs, making more money, and playing a little bit less shows, and surviving that way, right? Because we love touring and we love playing music, of course. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this. But you got to find a balance there, of course. And especially when I just love the music community here so much, and my home here, and I love to be able to invest some time into the musical community that made me who I am, So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I got to be the person I am today.
So that brings us to the River to River Community Records, and you tying back into the community here.
Mm-hmm.
Where did River to River Community Records come from? How did that start for you?
Well, having a record label for the just kind of amazingly diverse and talented musical community here has always been a dream of mine. It's something I've always wanted to do. And for a long time, I kind of figured maybe I would do it DIY punk style and just make, CDRs and photocopy covers and fold them up, and I always kind of considered leaning into that or doing like a tape label. But I kind of wanted to go vinyl. But going back a little bit, I mean, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, we all have a lot more free time.
The touring industry as a whole, the music industry, entertainment industry, getting large groups of people together for shows died completely for the longest period of time that it ever has.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was unprecedented.
And so for 12 months, 18 months, you're just at home, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it came to a grinding halt. The Big Damn Band, we were on tour kind of when it all hit. I mean, we were just kind of starting to tour and getting going again. And at the beginning of 2020, we always kind of start off the spring with a pretty healthy tour. And at the beginning of March, we started to hear about this thing. And we got real worried when we were doing a show in Austin, and our Uber driver told us that South by Southwest had been canceled. We're like, oh, wow, this is for real then. Being one of the biggest music fests in the country, obviously. Mm-hmm. And we played that show and then like a couple other shows before we just went home and backed it in. And we thought, oh, well, we'll get back to it in a month or so, a couple months. It'll be fine. We'll float until then. And then it was a couple years later before we got to touring full time, We stayed afloat by doing like online streaming things, and we set up a Patreon for the Big Damn Band where we could do exclusive kind of online content and people could support us there. But yes, I had a lot more time at home, a lot more time to hang out and fish, which was nice, and a lot more time to think about what I could do for this music community here. And especially when October 2020, I did a good chunk of the River to River Trail, which is something I've always wanted to do, but just haven't had time in the last many years, right? So in October, I started at the Mississippi River and hiked all the way to my house, which is pretty much south of Heron a little ways over there on 148. So it was a 60-mile trail, and I did it in about 8 days. But during that hike, I had a lot of time to myself to think about what I could do. And maybe that's a lot of why it's called River to River Community Records. But also because I want to cover the whole region here from river to river. So when I was on that hike, I had the idea, well, the community here has always been so supportive of one another and is rooted in that DIY sort of ethos that I knew that a community-funded record label would work. I knew that people in this community would want to see something like this happen. So I came up with the idea to set up a Patreon sort of online sustaining crowdfunding campaign to raise money for this record label. And the goal was, if I can get that Patreon account to $500 a month, then we'd launch this label, releasing 7-inch vinyl records for musicians that come from Southern Illinois. And it got there pretty quick. Got to $500 pretty quick. And so I was psyched that this was going to happen. This is finally going to happen. And the Patreon thing, I mean, I had kind of figured that all out by setting up the one for the Big Damn Band when the pandemic hit. So I knew all the ins and outs of running this Patreon campaign, and I knew I could do it for R2R. And yeah, the first release was Banjo Joe of the Whistle Pigs. And Banjo Joe I knew would be just the perfect kind of debut record on the label because he had kind of a hiatus of his own. And I know a lot of people had been kind of wondering, what's up with Banjo Joe? When's he going to make some more music? He had played with the Whistle Pigs for a lot of years, but kind of took a break for some years and was figuring out his own stuff. And I knew that he had some songs he was working on. I also knew that he had hiked a lot of the River to River Trail and had an appreciation for the natural beauty that we have here, as well as the musical beauty that we have here. And so he agreed, and he was the first 7-inch record that we put out. It was 3 songs by Banjo Joe, just solo Banjo Joe. And so that came out June 18th of last year. So I guess that would be the launch of the label. So we've been going for a little over a year now.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I've had a theory from the beginning of the pandemic, not the beginning. After we realized it wasn't going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and that it was going to be an extended downtime. And once, as artists, we were all at home for an extended period of time, I started thinking about all the arts that were going to come out of it. Mm-hmm. Thinking about the Renaissance and how that came out of the Black Plague.
Right.
So the Renaissance being a rebirth of the arts is exactly what I was looking forward to coming out of the pandemic, was all of these artists that are typically touring, that are doing public work, all of a sudden are going to be at home for a while.
Absolutely.
And I can't think of anything that they're going to do other than make art during that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was as dark as it was a pretty inspiring time. And yeah, I mean, as artists, you got nothing to do but sit around and make art. So I thought the same thing, I was like, well, when this is over, there will be an artistic boom of sorts that happens. And it didn't happen quite like I expected, just because it wasn't like just one day we were all like, okay, it's done, it's over, here we go, now we can start playing music again. It has just been sort of back and forth. And it's like, okay, it's open again, but it's closed again, but there's these restrictions. We can do this, but it's limited capacity. And so it's been kind of tough, because there definitely it wasn't like flipping a switch and it's like, okay, now it's time to begin again, you know. It's been a little tricky to navigate. But that definitely is true. That definitely is true. And I feel like the underground stuff, the punk music, the noise, and the experimental, actually, I think lost momentum even a little more than the maybe commercial genres, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, it's because the venues where those places, where those bands can perform, they're like just now starting to have shows again, and some of them are still kind of iffy about it. Whereas, you know, the venues that make money, they opened up as soon as they could because they had to pay the bills, and they had to get going again. But
someone's basement doesn't have that bottom line that they're looking at for.
Exactly. No, they just want to do what's best for their friends, you know.
Yeah.
Which is make sure they don't get sick. So I feel like that DIY stuff is just starting to kind of catch up. But it's happening. There's a new punk house that just opened up in Carbondale, the Oogle House. It's starting to do shows. Lost Cross is doing shows again. And yeah, of course, the clubs around here are doing music frequently now. And yeah, there's been a lot of people that have made amazing music during those couple of years off, and I'm hoping to release a lot of it.
Yeah. And so you started with Banjo Joe as your first album release. With that 7, and how did you land on doing a 7-inch vinyl?
Well, it was mostly because a 7-inch is a lot cheaper to produce than a 12-inch. And I knew I wanted to do vinyl because I love vinyl. I knew I didn't want to do CDs because CDs are honestly a dying format. Mm-hmm. Like it's hard to even find a CD player anymore. There ain't a CD player in your car or in your computer. So, you know, I wasn't going to do CDs. Tapes are a cool analog format, but just
even harder to find a player.
Yeah, exactly. And they're just kind of a pain in the butt more than anything. So I knew I wanted to do vinyl, and if I did a 7-inch, they're a little cheaper to produce, and I figured I could get a little quicker turnaround too. Instead of committing to an entire album, I could get these artists to just give me 2, 3, 4 songs that we can put on a vinyl record, get that done, and then go on to the next thing, you know, to try to just keep the ball rolling, you know. And so a 7-inch, a lot of people think that it's just 2 songs, but really you can fit about 7 minutes or something per side. So with a lot of these records, I've been getting 4 songs on a 7-inch, which is pretty decent for a physical format, analog physical format like that. So I do want to do full LPs eventually. That's definitely in the plans, but yeah, for now we've just been doing the EPs.
And I think they've been going great. We had Carve come on the show and also provide the soundtrack for a few weeks for our show as well. And one thing that I loved as part of our conversation was, from Kevin's perspective, was that he had a number of songs that he could put on the album, but finding the combination of songs that were the right length to combine for each side and to make sense as a complete album within 4 songs was a unique challenge all itself within the creative landscape of crafting an album.
Sure.
And I think that you and Kevin did a wonderful job with crafting that album because it really has a flow to it through all 4 tracks.
Absolutely, yeah. And he's a true artist, so of course he considered all of that, and it does have an almost cinematic feel to it, when you play it from front to back. And yeah, that's true. That's true. It's when you sort of limit the size of the canvas, it forces the artist to think about it in a different way, in a more creative way, maybe. Mm-hmm. And when you're just doing a digital release, there is no edge of the canvas. It can be as long as you want, and sometimes that can be overwhelming, or you don't know what to do or where to stop. But yeah, that's an interesting perspective that I didn't really focus on when I thought about doing 7 inches, but it is a cool aspect.
I was talking to Vincent Secretario recently of Wingtips, and we were talking about with the digital format, a lot of people they'll record a bunch of stuff for an album and not really edit that much out because it's all going digital. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting albums with 18, 19 tracks on them.
Yeah.
That, in previous times would be a double or triple album.
Yeah.
Just to get it onto the physical format. But now they're just doing it as this giant digital dump in under the heading of an album. Mm-hmm. That they don't have that limitation anymore.
Yeah. Sure. Which is it's an amazing time to be a musician because of that. But the digital world and the digital music, the DSPs, the streaming services and all that it's the new way to listen to music, and it has completely changed the game. Mm-hmm. And the
monetization of it is not advantageous for the artists in any way.
Yeah, not necessarily. It can be, but usually isn't, right?
Only for the biggest artists.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to have a lot of listens and a lot of followers. And the problem is those big artists, they've signed to some major record deal where they only get 15% of the royalties or something anyway. But also, this thing has happened where now a single gets basically as much attention as an entire record, because it's all about the attention you can get from that one drop, mm-hmm. right? So you drop a whole record, the labels, like the big labels, consider that as almost a waste of a post, I mm-hmm. guess, to simplify it, because you're putting all the effort into promotion and marketing, and you're going to do all of those 12 songs at once. Well, you could split it up and just do singles and keep dropping singles. And this is what a lot of the bands are doing. A lot of the big kind of, digital artists who kind of came up on Spotify and got found on there, they just drop singles after single, because that's how you stay in the algorithm and stay relevant on the platform. Because every time you drop one song, you can only get one song in the playlists and stuff, not the whole record. So it's strange that the album, the format of an album, is almost becoming like obsolete in the music marketing kind of realm, which is crazy.
Well, and the old practice of sitting there and listening to an album and reading through the liner notes while you do it, and mm-hmm. and delving into everything that the artist wants you to know about it, is gone by the wayside as well. Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Music has become a more passive thing. It's background stuff you put on while you're studying or while you're working or whatever, and that's why I love vinyl, because vinyl, you got to commit some attention to it. You got to get that thing out and put it on there, and you got to flip it over when it's halfway through, and then, you got that thing in your hand where you can read all the notes and all the credits, and appreciate the art and everything else. So I mean, I kind of considered that when I was thinking about doing 7 inches too, because I was like, well, 7 inch, like I said, it's less songs, so you can kind of move on to the next thing a little sooner, and it's
so it fits the attention span of today's age a little bit better.
Exactly. So it's kind of that happy medium. It's still analog, and it's still a tangible physical thing, but maybe catering to the short attention span of the internet age a little bit too.
So you started with Banjo Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go from there with the artists that you're working with in River to River Community Records?
Well, first was Banjo Joe, and then I had talked to Kevin about doing the Carve record, but he was a little ways off from having his record mastered and ready to go. When I talked to him, he was still in the recording process, still like finishing up recording and mixing of those 4 songs. So the second record I put out was actually just my own stuff. Sad Max Senteney record, just 2 songs, 1 on each side. One song I recorded at my house, my home studio there, and Eva Joy, my partner Angie Fisher, is singing on one song, and I got Dakota Holden playing pedal steel on that one. It's called Rise of the Pillow Queen. The other song is Persuasion of Truth that I recorded here in Marion at Union Street Arts, which was fun. I did a session with Luke and Reese over there where they filmed the whole recording session. They wanted to have me come in there to help sort of showcase their new studio that they had just set up. So they had the idea. In fact, they approached me about coming in there to record a song where they would also video the entire recording session and kind of edit it together to make a music video. I was like, well, yeah, that sounds great. And we did that, and it turned out so good that I wanted to put it on the B side of that 7-inch record. So yeah, the second one was my own stuff, kind of just so I could have something going while we're getting Kevin's stuff together and still have another record coming out. And so it was that, and then Kevin, the Carve record, which, I mean, as soon as I started the label, I knew that he was going to be somebody I wanted to work with. He is just a staple of the music scene around here. He has collaborated with just about everybody and is a musical genius. He really is.
And that really shows in the album, too. It's,
yeah.
The way that some of the songs start with an ethereal, like, just an emotive noise and background sounds that then blend into the tone of the album. And
yeah. And that's the thing about Kevin is he's not one of these real sort of stiff, kind of scholarly music people. He's an artist as well. He's a very good musician, but also puts it in the context of art, masterfully. So I was honored to put out his record, and it just turned out so great. And then that pretty much brings us to today. And the next record's going to be The People versus Hugh Daniil, which Hugh, of course, is known for the Woodbox Gang, and they, put out a bunch of amazing records since 2001, I think, was their first album, somewhere around there. And Hugh is just maybe my favorite songwriter. I love his stuff. He has such a kind of dark but also humorous way of approaching just very poignant sort of social topics, and so I am super excited to get this record out.
so that's the next project coming.
Yep, and it'll be out at the beginning of next month. It's
Awesome.
coming right up. Yeah.
Awesome.
So we're kind of finalizing everything right now, and getting the release show booked. A lot of this stuff is like not quite official yet, so I don't want to announce anything, but we will be announcing all that stuff here very, very soon. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, even.
And that'll come out on the River to River Community Records page.
Yeah. Yep, of course.
And we'll tag that in the post in the details here.
Mm-hmm.
We're really looking forward to that. We're looking forward to what comes from that.
Yeah, it's great. The record's called Ope. Kind of the Midwestern sort of word that we all use but can hardly explain. Ope. But it's just it's a brilliant record that is very much kind of about the last couple years that we've gone through. That everybody needs to hear this thing. Yeah, it's excellent.
That's awesome.
4 songs on that one. And it was recorded at Misunder Studio over there in Murfreesboro.
With Mike Lasilius.
That's
over
right.
There. Yeah.
Yep, he does great work. We have a live performance video that's going to be coming out soon that was filmed there in the studio of a couple of those songs. Not actually from the studio session where they recorded the record, but a different live session we did there at the studio, and that's going to be really cool, which was filmed and edited by Charlie Queen and Moonfield Creative. Yeah, so it's exciting stuff. Can't wait.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
very cool. And how often do you plan on having releases with the label?
I mean, as often as I can, essentially. As soon as the coffers get high enough to spend money to put out another record, I'm going to do it. So we're still getting donations on the Patreon. They've dropped off a little bit since we started, but we're still making some money there. And with the merch that we sell and the records we sell, we're able to make enough funds to put out more music. So that's the idea. But the more support we get on Patreon and donations, and the more people buy our records and stuff, the more we can do. But yeah, I'm certainly not taking a salary on this or anything. 100% of the money that is made by donations or otherwise is going back into
putting out vinyls for local Southern Illinois artists.
That's right.
That's incredible.
So yeah, we got the Hugh one, and then Casey Lee Rogers' record is coming out. That'll probably be November, and that'll be it for 2022.
And Casey did a handful of at the beginning of the pandemic. As you know, we did our virtual series here, and Casey did a lot of our songwriting nights during that.
Oh, great!
And we loved having him as part of that, and honestly, that was so rewarding for us here at the Civic Center to be able to tap into the local community and help try to support the local community the local music community in that way by trying to keep things going and keep things moving and
sure
and get some of their music out there to people that might not have seen it before.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I feel like a lot of people in this region don't necessarily understand how much amazing music is made here, And a lot of it is, like I said, because it was a lot of it has been underground for so long. It's something that's kind of special about the music scene here. But I want to do what I can to expose it and make sure that people are listening locally, right? You try to eat local, you might as well try to listen local too, because we've got all kinds of great music that is made right here. Casey is a perfect example, and also just one of these versatile musicians who also he plays in Buzzard, which is some awesome just stoner rock kind of punk metal stuff that will really get your head swinging. But he's also just such a good kind of honky tonk country songwriter.
Yeah, and that's the majority of what we saw from him was his songwriting. Because he was mainly featured on the Songwriters Nights, and
sure,
and it was just really cool getting to experience that.
Yeah, he's wonderful. The record we're doing with him is just 2 songs. It'll be one per side, and it's a couple songs that he recorded in Nashville, and they were produced by a fella named Daniel Donato, who is a Telecaster slinger down in Nashville, and just a fantastic producer and musician himself. And he and Casey have got to be buddies somehow. And so Daniel Donato produced his record with his band, kind of backing up Casey on a couple of his songs. And it turned out fantastic. Yep, so just 2 songs, but, we're trying to figure out if we can... I might be recording another one of his that's just going to be like an acoustic song that we can kind of drop to sort of supplement that physical release, because it's kind of nice to have something out there to establish the Spotify profiles and all that stuff before you drop the record, so maybe a little extra coming too. But,
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for telling us about this.
Of course.
It's a fantastic service to the music community in Southern Illinois. And it sounds like it's an incredibly cool and exhausting hobby to do on top of your 200 tour dates every year, or travel dates, touring, that whenever you're home, you're able to dive into this and really give back in this way. It's really awesome.
Well, thank you, Josh. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And we'll link to your website and to your Facebook page in the notes in the description. So take a look at that. Get to know his releases. You can order albums from there, as well as some cool merch. They've got some great stickers and T-shirts and tank tops on the site as well. Yep. So thanks for joining us today, Max.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for State of the Art Southern Illinois, a podcast by the Marion Cultural and Civic Center, featuring local artists, artisans, musicians, arts organizations, and arts events in Southern Illinois, as well as touring artists coming to the Marion Cultural and Civic Center. Special thanks to Max Senteney for his time speaking with us today, and a special thank you to Wingtips for providing this episode's soundtrack. Join us every Thursday morning for a new episode on Facebook, YouTube, or whatever audio podcast service you prefer. And now for Fallback by Wingtips in its entirety.